The current state of Mythic Plus, it's not good. I dropped a video just yesterday talking about Ian's interview with PC Mag, and some of his responses to some of the questions were, I didn't like him. It seemed like he kind of was playing off of the fact that Mythic Plus isn't popular right now because of delves. And while that's semi-true, people would like to do Mythic Plus. The reason why they're doing delves more than Mythic Plus is because Mythic Plus isn't fun right now. It's too difficult. There's too much shit going on. The difficulty ramp-up's insane. Queuing for shit and getting denied 100 times isn't fun. Even if you got an IO that fits the key level you want to do, people want higher than the IO that's typically required because it's a little bit harder right now. The truth is, Blizzard's got to bring it down a level. That's the truth. Back in Season 3 of Dragonflight, it was great. The difficulty was much easier, everyone was having a good time, and tanks weren't squishy little bitches. But, I digress. Let's see what Marcellian has to say about 11.1 Mythic Plus Doom. Blizzard finally admits it. They're not fun. Here we go. Let's see what Marcellian has to say.
Well, hello there and welcome back to Marcellian Online. And today we have a very important topic to discuss because they've admitted it. Now, Blizzard finally has said that Mythic Plus is not fun. They know why it's not fun, and they don't like it that it's not fun, and that will change in 11.1, or so they say in a recent interview with PC Gamer. So what exactly are we talking about, and is Mythic Plus fun, or it will continue the doom of Dungeons and players? Ian Hazakostas has been interviewed by PC Gamer just recently.
By the way, do you guys remember when Mythic Plus first launched, like in its Legion iteration, what it was like? You know what it was like? It was just literally an upscaled difficulty in terms of the amount of health each boss and NPC had, and the hit that they hit you with, right? They hit a little bit harder, and it just ramped up from there. There wasn't this never-ending increase in mechanics and all kinds of shit going on, and all these extra, Xaloteth popping up out of your butthole and releasing a bunch of mobs. Like, that shit didn't happen. It was literally just a tiny ramp-up in terms of the hit, in terms of how hard the mobs were hitting you and how much health they had. And that's changed. And it's gotten way overcomplicated. It's got the same problem that raiding has, essentially, where it's overcomplicated itself. Now, they realize that in Shadowlands, and raiding has taken a little bit of a downturn in terms of difficulty, which is good. It shouldn't be as hard as it was in Sanctum of Domination. That was dumb as shit, and all those other raids. Sepulchre of the First Ones was one of the craziest and most difficult raids I've ever been a part of. They've ramped it down. They need to bring it back down for Mythic Plus. They do.
And a couple of topics have been addressed and pulled up for discussion when it comes to Mythic Plus and what has happened in the first season of The War Within versus what the devs kind of hoped it would happen. Most of all, and probably the most important thing, is that Ian has actually said that the dungeons not being fun is definitely a problem that they're looking towards. We already know that probably the main issue is that players don't play Mythic Plus right now for different reasons, which we will go over.
Didn't they say more than half the player base doesn't even do a +2 ever the entire season? That's insane. And when he says he understands that they're not fun, I wonder if he realizes why they're not fun. He could just look at I guarantee you Dragonflight Season 3 had a higher participation rate than this current season does. And there's one reason. It's not just the dungeon pool. It's the difficulty. I promise you, it all goes back to that. It's just insanely difficult right now.
In this video, and them not playing it is not necessarily the problem here, which I actually agree with. Ian went on to say that you can actually not play Mythic Plus if you instead play Delve. So essentially when they added the Delve system, they kind of expected some people to shift from doing keys to doing Delves, which is normal. I mean, you have different content to play, but at least you're still playing the game, and from the dev's perspective, that's what matters. However, if people stop playing Mythic Plus because they're not fun, as opposed to having an alternative, that is indeed a problem, and the numbers definitely show that Mythic Plus hasn't been fun outside of the 10,000 videos that everybody with a YouTube account has kind of made in the last, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months, especially since beta, for some of us content creators, of course. And it's good that they've listened. Is it too late? Well, we'll probably
it's too late for Season 1, that's for sure. It's definitely too late for Season 1. Season 2, we'll have to see. Supposedly, Ian in that interview said that they have changes implemented right now on their own servers that they haven't even put on the PTR yet for Season 2. So maybe they're going to do the right thing and they'll get things fixed. But you know how I know, and how many players know, that It's not just that delves are available and that's why they're down in terms of Mythic Plus participation. I guarantee you this season will have way less Keystone Masters than any season previously. And it's not a delve thing because WoW players are degenerates who will chase eye level no matter what. The truth is, people are not getting higher than what a delve +8 is going to give you because any key beyond the +6, which is what's going to give you higher eye level gear than the +8 delve is going to give you, they're literally impossible to do for a lot of the regular Andys out there. If you're a casual Andy logging in, you know Greg from accounting, he's got an abusive wife and 2 kids who don't appreciate what he does for them every day. How the fuck's he going to log on and do a +7 or +8? Seriously, you think he wants to log on and get into that toxicity if he in fact gets invited, right? The fact that he's going to get rejected 36 times. He finally gets that invite and literally gets, run through the ringer in terms of toxicity because they wipe one time on some random group. That sounds like a good time? I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. So Greg from accounting just not even going to deal with it. He's just going to accept the fact he's not going to have that high of an eye level this season. He's going to go in and do his delves and have his 5 minutes of peace in his day. Yeah, poor Greg, man.
To find out eventually, but what exactly
Shout out for Greg in the
is
chat.
the situation of the current
Greg
season of
from
Mythic
accounting.
Plus? Because we actually have numbers. We actually have very good examples of how much the meta influences the dungeons, how much the dungeons influence the meta, and how all of this makes your keys a pain, makes it close to impossible for you to find a group if you're not playing the right spec. And from the developers of Raider.io and the founders and everybody that collects data there, we also have some numbers going into it. First of all, just an overall look at the dungeon representation. Currently, or at least in week 14th of the season, there are 4 times fewer keys and players, or keys, I guess, being done than in the first week of the dungeon, which is a massive dropout
huge drop
in terms of dungeon participation and overall the content being played by the players. Of course, every season you're going to have a drop-off, and not just in Mythic Plus, but in raids and in all aspects of the game. People come in, they check it out, some of them don't find it fun, they leave, some of them finish what they want to do quicker and they still leave, so overall the player base drops a little bit.
Right, you're always going to have the typical drop off of the unsubbers, right? The people, the 1 month Andes, the people who sub at the beginning of the expansion do the shit and then unsub, basically. But this drop off, I guarantee you, is much steeper than any previous season.
So overall, the player base drops a little bit. A little bit is a little bit relative, but it also is true. This time it's more than just a little bit, and we have felt it from the first week where we would find a group in like, I don't know, 5 minutes tops, to now taking 30 to 40 minutes to find a group of players that will get us in, sometimes not even ever inviting us because we're just not playing the meta spec. So that is the initial issue. Why we're here? Well, let's take a look at the meta. As we've known since I think 1105, whenever the Prop Paladin buffs came in, it has made Prop Paladin the de facto tank for a bunch of reasons. Well, before getting to the reasons, just you need to know that right now, over 90% of the keys that are being done, they have a Prop Paladin in it.
Wow.
That is way more over-representation than we've ever had before, even in the God Comp season of Dragonflight that people have severely criticized, only had, what, Bear, Augmentation, Shadow...
There's not a single blood DK in any of this. This is why I don't get invites.
Priest and Fire Mage, I think it was at the time. Now it's even more than that. 90% of the keys having only 1 tank just means that if you're not playing a tank, and if you're not playing Prop Paladin, you are at a loss. And need I remind you, there are 6 tanks.
If you don't know, Ian kind of brushed this off in the interview. He said, if our internal statistics show that meta and non-meta specs get the same invite rate, that doesn't help comfort anybody who's not getting invited. He kind of really did. He was like, guys, shut the hell up. It's not a meta problem. Now, these are higher end keys, so I'm sure the higher that you get in the key, the more the meta becomes an issue. I highly doubt people are pushing meta in a +4 key. But still, this is clearly an issue. Look at this shit.
It's
like no variety.
5 of which compose of less than, what, 8% of the total keys being done?
You actually kick Olive Ogre.
That is very big. On top of that, over 40% are the same comp. So if you take the most popular comp in Mythic Plus, which according to Raider.io comprises of Prot Paladin, Discipline Priest, Red Paladin, Augmentation Evoker, and Frost Death Knight. These compose over 40% of the total keys done. This is massive considering that before, if you had a very good comp, the God comp, it would comprise at most 6% of all of the keys done. So one comp is essentially played 5 times more than ever in the
Oh my God.
And which will normally trickle down to the average player, where if you're not playing one of these specs, you're likely not going to get
well, it might not be the fact that the meta is so overpowered right now. I think it's actually the fact that a lot of the casual player base has been eliminated, like completely pushed out of Mythic Plus this season. And the casual Andes are the ones who are going to play more of a variety, right? You're going to see more from, they're just going to invite a tank and a healer. They're not going to try to push the meta. They're going to invite 3 DPS and go on their way. Well, you're not seeing a lot of that because those people aren't even trying. So basically they've all been filtered out, and the only thing you have left is the raging hard on Andes who push Mythic Plus all the time nonstop, and they're going to push the meta because those guys are all about min-maxing everything, right? So that's essentially what you've done, is you've filtered out the variety because you filtered out all the casual Andes because this season's way too difficult. It all comes back. See, every single problem he's talked about so far, even though Blizzard's tried to point to other reasons like, oh, it's the meta, oh, it's delves. No, it all comes back to one thing. It's just too difficult. It's too difficult. And some people out there can be like, get good. No. I think every single person can agree Season 3 of Dragonflight was better, whether you're a hardcore player or not. And it's not because everyone was good that season. No, it's because the season was easier.
Fight it into the key, let alone having to wait 30-45 minutes to get into
knock it off, start bank.
And we even have personal examples from, I believe, the founder of Raider.io, who went on to say that him and his buddies usually do keys and push in the range of getting their portals done, usually end up in the top 1 to 2% in that season in the world. Now,
see, like, this is about plus 16 keys. We can go back and look at it. There's obviously statistics on this from my WoW Armory. I did plus 20s in Season 3 and of Dragonflight, and I'm not even a key pusher. I did plus 20s, so my comp would have been in here. And there's a lot of casual Andes out there who would have had their comps in here, but they're not. Because right now you only got the hardcore boys doing this shit.
Getting their portals done, usually end up in the top 1 to 2% in that season in the world. Now that's close to impossible, and their usual comp is, I believe that he said, Blood Death Knight, Arms Warrior, Beast Mastery, Holy Paladin, and probably Red Paladin, something like that. And they found it close to impossible to be able to get to that range right now. And if they had to like pug keys, sayonara, no keys done for you. And that's from people that are usually in the top 1 to 2% in the world. That paints a picture as to where the situation with Mythic Plus is today.
Yeah.
And of course, like I mentioned, the reasons that led up to this have been pointed out since early beta by a lot of people, us included to a lesser extent, but we've had our fair share of, oh my god, this season is not looking too good, and part of that was because tanks and healers were severely nerfed in terms of their overall gameplay and how they interact.
Somebody also commented on this. They're like, this guy Sam just fucking complains about how squishy tanks are now every single video. Is because it's an actual problem. It doesn't just affect me as somebody who only plays Blood DK. It affects everybody because it's made keys way more difficult. If the tank is dying in places where he didn't used to die, which is an actual confirmed fact because literally Blizzard's bringing back Mechagon and they have to nerf the shit out of it in terms of tank busters because tanks used to be able to handle them and now they can't. That's a confirmation right there that tanks are squishier now. Those changes need to be reverted. I'll say it every single video. Until Ian comments himself saying, hey, Samiccus, we heard you. We're going to change that. It's not. It needs to be changed back. It's a big problem.
With the combat encounters, there were insane
being in a key with Sam
100%
makes the key hard.
That went on through the groups that needed interrupts to be able to be stopped, not just stuns or knockbacks or anything like that. The amount of casts being so exacerbatedly high meant that you would first need melees in your group and not range, because melees have faster kicks, so you overall interrupt way more, on top of you wanting a Prot Paladin right now that just interrupts non-stop and constantly, and that just creates the current meta that we have today. Not to mention that particular mechanics that exist into a dungeon, whether it is debuffs, dispels, or types of damage that you or your party takes or that is required from you pushed Discipline Priest to be one of the top healers. And before Discipline Priest, it was Restoration Shaman that was, I think, the only healer outside of Druid, which was just very undertuned, that could dispel both poison and curses. Remember, there was a time when Poison Cleansing Totem was on a very short cooldown, and that was the time when Restoration Shaman was probably having the highest representation in terms of the healers.
He said, remember there was a time when Poison Cleansing... You know what I want to remember? A time where you didn't have to fucking kick and nut crap everything in the game. Right? Where you didn't have to constantly interrupt, cleanse, dispel, do all this stupid shit for random mob pulls. I'm talking about just like the random five little mobs in the corner that you have to pull. It's crazy. I'm telling you, go back to Legion. Play the original iteration of Mythic Plus. You'll see what I'm talking. Maybe you'll do it in Legion Classic. You'll remember what I'm talking about. Random mobs didn't have 100 mechanics. You literally pulled them and face rolled them down. That was it, and mind you, that was the time before AoE limits existed too, where you could literally just pull 2-3 mobs and AoE the shit out of them down. Now, it's every single mob has 36 mechanics. You gotta interrupt this, dispel that. Oh, the fucking priest didn't dispel this in time. The group just died. Oh my god, Zalateth popped up. Now she's launching void dildos at us. Oh, you didn't interrupt the cast before it went off. Now we all got dildoed to death. Like, all that shit is just way too... And then, by the way, that happens, and then the guy who was supposed to interrupt it gets yelled at. You know, again, Greg from accounting getting yelled at for no reason. It's too much. It's way too much.
That was nerfed. Then we moved on to Discipline Priest because the mechanics are so brutal
Void
and
dildos,
so specific.
you
You just had to have very specific responses to them, and by nature of what that means, you would just have fewer specs being able to respond to these types of mechanics. That, with the dungeons being overtuned and the classes having a relatively shitty balance across the board, pushed very specific compositions to be the ones that actually worked, especially in the high end of keys, and that trickles down to the regular average Joes like you and I, that if you're not playing one of these specs, it's just go play something else. And the devs have recognized this being an issue. By the devs, I mean, of course, Ian Azakosis, which is a big thing, by the way, because they hardly ever recognize this publicly in such a deliberate way, where if the dungeons are not fun, that's indeed a problem, which is the biggest thing that Ian has said about Mythic Plus in the last couple of years, most likely. This, of course, means big things are coming for Season 2, because they normally don't say anything that they're not going to be implementing. Now, they already are working on solutions. Some of them have already been implemented, if not just data mined. First of all, we know about the keys not depleting anymore once you reach 2,850 dungeon score, IO score, or Mythic Plus score, whatever you want to call it. The keys will not drop below a +12. This is the current version of this solution, which is a shit solution, and I will tell you in a second why that is. Also, tank busters are going to be nerfed from what Ian has said in this interview. That doesn't really say much, considering that right now we are playing a outdated version of the PTR, which is in and of itself kind of bad when you start the PTR test cycle with an already old version of the system.
Yeah, he's right. They need to get the shit that Ian was talking about that they haven't put on the PTR yet. They need to get it on there. They do, because I think fixing Season 2, no matter how good 11.1 is, which I think it's going to be good in terms of all the shit they're giving us, you know, the new zone and the new raid and everything. It all looks fun. But if Season 2 is shit again, people are not going to have a good feeling about the patch. They need to make sure that Season 2 Mythic Plus is going to be good. It's a core pillar of the game. You got raiding, you got Mythic Plus, you got, what else? You know, your open world shit. Basically, those are the pillars of your vault. Those are the three main pillars of the game. And then a little bit of PvP, because PvP is a tiny PP right now. But it is what it is. People still like to do it. So we'll count that as well. Those things, if one of those three things, the PvP can sometimes be bad and the game's still good. If one of those three things are bad, people have a sour taste in their mouth about the game. So we need to make sure that Season 2 is good. They need to get these changes on the PTR and get them tested immediately.
Doesn't really create the first impression that we need to make sure that Season 2 is more appealing to players, but I digress. Let's say that the tank bosses and overall tank mechanics will be nerfed, aka tanks won't take as much damage, leaving out a lot of the tank specs being unplayable in the future, and of course healers not being able to respond to certain types of damage coming into the group. Although we don't really know much about the healers at the moment, if their general playstyle and gameplay will be addressed. We of course know that augmentation is going to be nerfed, which is maybe the biggest thing thing that happened in terms of class and spec balance, because it has been an overwhelming spec to have in dungeons, and augmentation being nerfed means a lot of things that will happen to healers. First of all, healers are overall nerfed because they need to heal more, since augmentation provided a good amount of tankiness to the entire group and was the reason why keys could be pushed so high up. Take away augmentation not being able to buff tanks and healers, and everybody will do lower keys. We don't know what lower means, 2, 3, 4 key levels below what they're currently doing, which is an overall nerf of the entire community. Meaning that in order to follow this up, you would need to also severely nerf dungeons as a baseline to account for the fact that augmentation no longer helps keep people push up. I'm not saying that they buff dungeons because people would be playing augmentation, but I'm saying that people don't like it when they cannot push very high. That just creates an unfun season. It's what we're having right now. And if you take away a reason why they were also being able to push that high, then you have to nerf the dungeons even more so that you don't have people just being stuck in plus 11s and 12.
Again, augmentation is not the problem. Nerfing augmentation is not going to fix the problem. Like he's saying right now, it goes back to the dungeon difficulty. If the dungeon wasn't so difficult that augmentation was required, basically, to push a key super high, then they wouldn't be the only class that gets invited all the time. Make the dungeons easier, and you'll see the variety return to the game.
And a little bit of a good news is that after we've tested the Operation Floodgate, these changes are actually placed in the design of the new dungeon, which I have had previous wrong opinions about, although
look much better.
You'll see the full opinions on the dungeon, I think tomorrow or the day after, when we have our video up for that as well. But just a long story short, the dungeon has fewer casts overall and fewer mechanics overall, making it less overbearing and less stressful to actually do. Some of these mechanics, like the saw mechanics that you've seen and that you probably heard memes about, are overtuned, but that's not that big of a problem as long as they know that they don't want them to be overtuned. They can just tune it. That's just in tuning. Whenever you have 17 mechanics instead of 3, it's kind of harder to tune into the dungeon without just nerfing the mobs or taking the mobs out of the dungeon pool altogether. So the fact that it's less stressful to do Operation Floodgate is a good sign that the Season 2 will be better. And I've done it from a melee DPS, range DPS, tank, and healer perspective. And I do have to say, it's way better than the dungeon pools that we've had to test prior to Season 1 being released. And it's great that their mentality is set to make Season 2 easier, more accessible, and more fun to players. However, I do think that they're still missing the mark on some of them, and it's risky to push forward some of these solutions because it feels like they're disconnected from the actual problem. Tanks and healers, first of all, need to be less punished, which we're already kind of working into that direction, but we're only really seeing the tank part.
Buff tanks.
The healer is a little bit more abstract, so I'm hoping that those will be addressed as well, because one of the biggest problems for people to pug dungeons is being able to get into a group as most people would be, a DPS player, which is very difficult since everybody just wants healers and tanks. Now, also, once again, these need to be addressed in the perspective of augmentation not being a spec that assists you in keeping people alive or staying alive yourself. The second of all, mechanics. We know for the first dungeon that's coming in, which is Operation Floodgate, needs to be nerfed drastically, and they have to be less specific, which is not something that we can say about the
he got wrecked.
4 War Within dungeons, which have been designed with the mentality of the Season 1.
The hell kind of mechanic is that?
So hopefully those will be addressed in time as well. And what do I mean by specific mechanics? I mean, of course, the 10 million casts that we have been having so far in the first season that will promote Prot Paladin and melee DPS above everybody else to be able to handle all these interrupts. And of course, that goes down to being able to interrupt without just using a kick. If I can stun, I want that spell to be interrupted because I used something to stop the mob from casting. That change that was added in the PTR or beta cycle for the War Within has been heavily criticized, not good, not liked by almost anybody. So we hope that actually goes away.
I'm watching this. I'm learning these mechanics as I'm just watching this. This is pretty easy visual right here. People are popping the bombs in the center of the room, and then the tank is taking care of the ones in the outer parts of the room with the charge. That's a fine mechanic. Not too crazy. A lot of these other mechanics that we've been dealing with, you're inside of a circle, you're moving the boss. He's doing this fucking random shit. You got to interrupt this thing. If you don't, the group gets one-shotted. There's just way too much shit. Way too much shit going on in some of these fights. They're not raid bosses. If people want raid boss mechanics, they can go raid. Okay, these are not supposed to be raid bosses. Sam, please don't lie. Don't lie to us. We know how you are very, very, very well. What? I'm very good. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. The visuals are better. Yeah, the swirlies are much better. I do agree.
Season 2.
Swirlies and visuals on the ground, they look good.
Possible. There are also melee unfriendly mechanics in the new dungeon, which will make it harder to actually use a melee DPS in the dungeon the higher you push, which will skew the meta towards a more ranged heavy. Once again, the more specific mechanic, the higher chance you will play a specific spec
Maybe
for it, the
red
higher
knot.
chance that the meta will revolve a more tightly knit choices of specs, which will again create a problem today that people cannot get into a group if they don't play the particular spec. On top of this, balance needs to be addressed as well, balance between specs. Of course, that's always going to be a topic of discussion.
That's always a thing.
Specs will never be equal in terms of power, because then we would just play one spec with different names and that would just be about it, and that would be boring. That's fine. I'm not talking about that. What I am talking about, once again, similar to mechanics, the encounters have to be less specific. That will promote a specific type of utility kit that certain specs have that other specs don't have. Stuff like poison dispels, curse dispels being required, stuff like grips being required. We want to have as few of those mechanics as possible, not zero of course, because as a DK I kind of want to feel like my grip will matter at one point.
Right.
But maybe a controversial take in terms of balance and in terms of how this will affect the group composition is introducing bigger pools. From what we have seen in terms of the dungeon tuning so far is that
pools.
they will continuously nerf people being able to pull bigger, and I feel like that will just create more niche and specific meta composition, since not all specs perform the same way in different AoE scenarios. Specs like Red Paladin, Fury Warrior,
bigger pulls, that's right.
Really
I miss, and I keep referring to it, but the early days of Mythic Plus, man, I mean, the god pulls that people could pull off, the numbers were insane. Those things were fun. I don't know why Blizzard's so anti-big pulling. I know they don't want to see the problem is when they started making Mythic Plus a competition. Of course, this is what brings up the problems, right? It's always, and I watched a video about this the other day, but it's always the high-end competition. When you want to turn this into some kind of esport, that's where you get problems. Because Blizzard saw the Mythic Dungeon Invitationals and all this shit going on, and they were like, oh, these highly skilled players are pulling half the dungeon at once. We don't want that. Time to change the game. What happens? Everybody else gets punished for the high-end 0.1 percenters to have an actual gameplay that makes sense, right? It's the same reason why, what's it called? What's the new Marvel game? Marvel Rivals or whatever? Why that game's so good right now is because there is no esport for it. I guarantee you, the second an esport goes into it and they start trying to balance everything perfectly, the game's going to become Overwatch 2.0. I promise you. Right now, it's a little bit broken. That's how it should be. That's what makes it it makes it fun. Right? Same with Fortnite, all these when the skill level gets too high, when the shit gets too crazy and the game starts to be made for the top 1 percenters, that's when you start to run into problems. And that's what Blizzard ran into with Mythic Plus. And they ran into it with rating, with Race to World First, same issue.
Low target AoE, while specs like Unholy and
can't make the game for 1%
really
of people.
Big AoE, and you don't see the latter and you see the former because we cannot just pull very big, similar to tanks. The bigger the pools can be, the more people can actually engage with the content and be able to pool different kinds of mobs based off of different party compositions and different DPS available, essentially opening up the doors for more people to play their specs and not feel like, oh, I just cannot fight this because I just don't do damage to half of the mobs, or I only do half of my damage because we're just not pulling big enough. That is a problem that creates a strict meta. And last but not least, in terms of the solutions that they have proposed, depletion needs to be revised. Having the keys not being able to deplete once you reach 2,850 score means jack shit. Because that right now means it will affect less than 2% of the player base, which
what
is
the fuck kind
who
of fix
actually
was that?
has this score already.
Now, but honestly, like in their corporate offices at Blizzard, like why the fuck would they implement a change that only affects 2% of the player base when 100% of the player base is complaining about key depletion? That makes no sense. I don't understand it. It's I can't even think of a fucking example. It'd be like, I don't know, fuel emissions being a problem. And so, they look around and they're like, okay, we got to fix fuel emissions. Let's target the Toyota Camry because only 2% of people drive that car. We'll fix the Camry and that should fix the problem. The fuck? What are you talking about? If there's a problem that everyone's voicing their opinions on, you got to implement a solution that affects more than 2% of the player base. I think key depletion's bullshit. I don't think it should exist. I think it's part of the reason why people don't get invited to groups in the first place, is because everyone's afraid their key's going to get depleted. So they're only inviting people with IOs that are far exceed what the key even requires to get done. So that's a problem in and of itself. I think if they get rid of key depletion, you'll get more invites. They need to just drop that shit. Also, deaths. Death penalties of 15 seconds, that's way too punishing. That breeds toxicity too.
This is a change
Sam just mad
requested
'cause
by
he's
the
not the
entire
2%.
community, and if it affects only 1 to 2% of the player base, it doesn't really solve a problem, does it? When 98% of the players will never see this change in the game. That's the first issue of this solution. The second issue of this solution is that it stops keys from going below 12, which means that the keys will still deplete. If you're doing a 14, it will still drop to a 13. And maybe this depletion will happen to all of the key levels, but if it will only stop keys going below a specific level, it will just kind of half solve this problem. And these half-assed responses and half-assed solutions are what led us to having covenants in Shadowlands, where from very strict covenants to being annoying and less annoying and less annoying, until they finally pulled the ripcord in the last patch and let us just switch covenants. It has been shown time and time again in previous season, whether it was season 3 of Dragonflight, whether it was the last season of Shadowlands or BFA, whenever they fully commit to a solution, people love it more and they play it more. Whether it's corruptions in BFA, covenants in Shadowlands, or just class representation in Dragonflight in season 3, we need to fully embrace a solution and not just cherry pick a little bit. Actually, it will only affect 1% of the player base and only above keys 12s and so on. And if we're gonna address depletion,
solution for
there
2%.
are some big contenders and players that factor into this depletion problem. First of all is the Challenger's Peril affix, which gives us a big penalty when we die. In and of itself, this is not the problem, but then on top of this, you add the dungeon timer, which of course these have been played with to kind of adjust for this, but still feel like the solution is not there, because once again,
you're saying you know, don't compare Sam to a Toyota. That's ridiculous. Toyotas are not the best. But anyways, what I was saying, you were saying that you don't have to do higher level keys. The thing is, I used to enjoy doing higher level keys. That's the problem, Daganja. You're right that no one's forcing me to do higher level keys, and maybe there's ways for me to go get gear somewhere else. And maybe I don't deserve the higher item level gear. Some elitists will say that because I'm not good enough. But the thing is, I used to enjoy that. I did. So I know what it feels like to have fun doing Mythic Plus. It's a pillar of the game that I used to have fun doing. And then something changed. That something is they ramped up the difficulty to a level that just made it inaccessible. So why did that happen? Wouldn't Blizzard rather have people participating in a piece of content that they're taking the time to develop for the game? If less than 50% of your player base is not interacting with content that does take extreme dev time to get into the game, there's something wrong. That's a waste of your dev time. You need to fix that shit. Go back, figure out how the hell you had more than 50% of people participating, and go back and revert the changes to what it used to be, which was easier. Tanks were better. Healing was easier. The dungeons themselves were easier. There was less mechanics to do. It bred less toxicity. You just make it better. Make it better. That's it. I don't have to do it. You're right. But I used to do it. And there's a reason why I don't anymore.
Cherry picking, we're half-assing the solution. No. Graveyards are also a big problem. You can take away the Challenger's Peril and give a dungeon timer, be very generous, but if it takes me 30 to 45 seconds to come back to my party after I died, that's also a problem in and of itself that needs to be addressed. The balance between these systems has to be very delicate in order to not feel like it's overbearing, or take away these problems altogether with giving graveyards at every boss, at every big corner of a dungeon, and so on and so forth, especially when you have dungeons where you skip packs, but you cannot go back to your party because there's a pack that you skipped that now you have to fight to get back to your group.
That's shitty.
And last but not least, another good thing about the depletion that has been addressed are the rewards. Now, that has been addressed in 11.07, where we get more crests if we deplete the key than before, significantly more crests before, and we get overall more crests to begin with, solving the gearing option in the reward system. This is now. We don't know if this will continue in Season 2, but it has to continue into Season 2 for the season to be saved. And this is just from one interview. Is Mythic Plus saved right now? it's looking like it's going to be, but going to be and being are
Hopefully.
not the same thing at the moment. So we can only hope that more and more feedback is being provided and listened to by the devs, so we can actually have a more fun Mythic Plus environment in Season 2. And to get hyped for Season 2, you should look at the tier lists that we have, because they might need some solving as well.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I agree with a lot of what he said, except when he tried to kind of blame some of the issues of the meta and things on other things. It all comes back to one thing. It's too difficult. At the end of the day, that's what it is. If they fix that problem, all the other problems will be fixed. More people will do it. You'll have less toxicity. More people will get invited to shit. It'll just be better all around. So bring down that difficulty. If people want difficult Mythic Plus content, they can just push the keys higher. Just infinitely grind that shit, push it higher until it gets to a point where it hurts, okay? And then you could stop. Other than that, right now, more than half the player base never doing a +2. That's way too much. That says something about the content. It's just not fun. That's what it comes down to.